strategic alignment, matching community objectives with industry opportunities. So just after I left BC Hydro, I went to the province of British Columbia, where I was, for a period of about 4.5 years, the Associate Deputy Minister for the Ministry of Energy Mines, working primarily in the energy and mining field. Developed the first ever for-pay consultation protocol in the province of British Columbia with Treaty 8 and some of the Treaty 8 First Nations in Alberta. An agreement that is still in place, that is still providing resources to the nations in Treaty 8 who are working particularly with the oil and gas sector in terms of consultation processes. Our company focuses in 3 areas: in strategy, partnership, and in consultation. We, in terms of our client portfolio, we work about 70% of our clients are industry and corporations, and 30% are First Nations. I want to just talk about what we've been learning in the past few years, because we're continually learning. As you know, it's not, there's no prescription or engineered model for the work we're doing in bringing First Nations and the corporate sector together. And so the first thing that we kind of carry as a mantra is that it's changing all the time. The landscape, you know, I think about my first job ever that I had was in an Indian Friendship Center. And we, at that time, this is a bit dating, but I was 12 when I started. So the program was called the Migrating Native Peoples Program at that time. And it was Canada's response to the recognition that Aboriginal people were beginning to leave reserve communities in huge numbers. And they were coming into urban settings where, largely speaking, they were just swallowed up by all of the negative influences of those settings, the lack of connection to family and all those things. And if there's one thing that's been true over the 35 years since I started that job, it's that no day looks the same in terms of what's happening with Aboriginal people in our society. And so think about it. This is just, it's like a snapshot, right? I mean, it's like a second when you think of global history. We had this Indian Center, and it was my first experience with Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal relations, right? Because I'd never worked with anybody non-Aboriginal. We grew up in our small family unit, and we actually had a farm on the river, and so we went to build this friendship center, and there were about 7 communities. It was in Quesnel. There were about 7 communities around us, Indigenous communities. The closest was, I think, about 60 miles, and the rest were, I should change that to kilometers and be more hip, but I can't make the translation. Anyway, the furthest was about 200. These were communities that didn't even have roads into them yet. Klaskus, which is now known as Luskus by its traditional name, used to take horse and wagon from out. They're kind of between Prince George and Bella Coola, if you think locationally. So they used to take horse and wagon and come in on a wagon trail in as far as Nasco, and then come in from there. So, you know, when people were coming in from those communities, they were really lost, even though Quesnel wasn't a big town. But so we started this center, and we started in a house. There was a group of people, and it was my family. Like, my mom had started it, and some of my aunts, and you know how we Indians are. The clan works together. So we found this old house that we were able to rent, and it was close to where everybody had to come through town to get into town. But all of the other people around us were non-native people. That was the first challenge. Nobody wanted to rent the house to us, right? And then they found out that we had funding from government, and so that made us a little bit more acceptable. And we started trying to build relationships with our partners around there. And over time, in a 10-year period, we eventually built a very large center, which ran, we had a hostel, we had a 20-person hostel because all the medical services were there, so these communities would come in. We had that. We ran a driving school. We had a drug and alcohol detox center. We ran job education and training programs. And so we evolved into kind of a big deal in the community. But the most interesting thing about our story, it wasn't the services we did. They dictate themselves. What you have to do emerges and it dictates itself. It was the relationship that we worked on forging over the time. So from going there at the very beginning where nobody would rent us a place, nobody would wanted to deal with us in any way. When we built that new center, we built it on land that was donated by 3 of the citizens in that neighborhood who had recognized that what was happening was important and it was pivotal, and they wanted to support it. And then 5 or 7 years later, we were very surprised when this British lady who'd been the most active opponent, I guess, to our being there, to the Indian Center being there, willed her entire estate to the society. So that was kind of the first attempt. And what we learned about what was really important in making it change, what made that happen, was just that we just talked to people, right? We just talked to people and we listened to people and we tried to understand what it was they were saying, what kind of concerns they were bringing to the table, what their interests were. And that was a long way of telling you how I got to what we do in our business, because that's what we really do. We try to bring Aboriginal and corporate interests together through really meaningful and constructive dialogue. And some of the, one of the important things about that is recognizing that things are constantly changing. That everybody's driven by multiple forces. Like you can go to any one of your organizations and look at how you operated 5 years ago, and you're going to be a kind of a different beast in the way you do things, in the kind of time frames you're dealing with, the technology and tools and resources, the human capital you have, all of those things just keep shifting, and everybody's being pulled in multiple ways. And so we think, to really get results, you have to be strategic about what you do. And you have to make, I'll try this again, have to make a lot of really deliberate choices. So the definition of strategy that we work by is that it's shaping the future in a way that gets to desirable ends with your available means. And trying to achieve goals under conditions of uncertainty, such as when there are insufficient resources to achieve these goals. And this applies both to First Nations and corporations. We never have enough resources or enough time or enough certainty or clarity about where the future's going. I think of one mining project we started working on with 7 communities in a mine, and we've been about 6 years in the process of that. There's been really significant regulatory change in the process. There's been really significant changes in environmental regulation. There's been huge changes in the governance and the leadership in the communities. Neither the company nor the community has ever had the kind of time and resources to devote, to making this work in the optimal way. So you just have to, that's just a constraint that you work with. But that makes it really important what you put your attention on, the kind of things you focus your time and attention on. And so we try to make sure that what we focus our time and attention on always enhances that dialogue, that moving towards interests, that moving towards an understanding of interests, listening more effectively, and getting through that front part of where we're both wearing masks, where the First Nation community is still really maybe reeling from the last experience they had with some charlatan that came into the community. And it doesn't matter who you are, you're kind of going to get the label. Or the reverse, right? Where the corporation has come in and they're working with a community that's got, that has its own issues and problems. So we just keep recognizing that it changes and that our strategies need to change. And they'll change, like in this project I talked about, the 7 years where we've been working on this one mining project, which is now under construction. I'm happy to report with a fabulous benefit agreement, more than a benefit agreement with the community, a partnership agreement with the community. But we've had to change the way we approached it many times. Our strategy changed, our priorities changed. And so we just keep shifting them as conditions shift. Starting with appreciating the differences. Each community is really unique in terms of capacity. Some are struggling on an ongoing basis with high levels of stress, distress, and they have very little ability to act, very little space or capacity to allow them to act beyond the short term, what's coming in the door, who's knocking on the door, what kind of crises are driving the community. Others are skilled and experienced at working strategically, and they can manage and respond strategically. And this can change really quickly, right? Sometimes it's a matter of leadership, changes that in the community, or other factors that make things change. Did I skip by one? Oh. Sorry, something's missing. I'll try to remember it. Understanding the Aboriginal perspective when I'm talking about matching community interests. A lot of our companies will sort of come to us and they'll start with, well, we'll give them some jobs, We'll give them some jobs, and, it's going to help their community economies. And we know that a lot of the community members are suffering from, extreme poverty. We can help all that. Well, and that's true. In many cases, companies can help that. And there are many people in the communities that are interested in that. But it may not have anything to do with the community's ultimate goals or their interests. And so you really have to get past that to find out what is it that the community is really interested in. And let me tell you a story about a project that we worked on. This was in the oil and gas patch. And the company, that industry makes investment decisions fairly quickly, particularly in the upstream industry where they're accessing it. And so how that process goes for anybody that's not worked in that is basically whoever, in this case it's the province of British Columbia, issues a tenure, they hold a land sale, and they sell the rights for exploration. And so this is what happens. The land sale happens, and then there's a flood, right? It's like an auction. They buy the land rights, and then they go out to develop it. And they want to move very quickly, right? Because that industry, like most industry, is driven by market prices. And if the land sales are high, that's because market prices are high. So they want to get in there. So the First Nations are not moving at the same pace. First of all, they're already overwhelmed. There's oil and gas development everywhere in this territory. It's not like you're special if you're an oil and gas company coming and knocking on a First Nations door. You're coming in and you're coming behind, multiple stacks of applications that are already there. And so we started the dialogue on behalf of our client, and we spent as much time helping our client understand that they might need to slow their pace a little bit, as we did working to get to the community and have the conversation with the community. So over time, we went through all the conventional practices we do in consultation. We identified all of the impacts and the perceived impacts. We did all the studies. First, the communities were involved in determining terms of references in the studies, participating in the studies, conducting the studies, analyzing the results, defining their impacts. At the same time, we had our working groups that were working on establishing the parameters for what might be contained in a benefit agreement, you know, the kind of jobs and contracting opportunities, training, education, all the conventional things. And we're pretty pumped. It looked really good, right? This was a very nice benefit package we brought to the community. Well, the first time, and their community members worked with us on developing it. And we took it to the community, and we sat with the leadership, and there was a distinctly flat response. So thinking, wonder what that's about. Maybe it's just bad timing. So we waited, and we went back with a little more information with exploring this. And to move quickly, because how much time do I have? Okay. We accelerated the discussion, and in particular the offline discussion. And what the community eventually said to us was, you know what, it is a great deal, and it's worth multi-million dollars over a number of years. It's going to train people, and it's going to support people. But you know what? Nobody wants to work in your industry. The people that want to work in your industry from our community are already working in the industry. There's lots of play in the oil and gas field. They want to work in our industry. So we said, well, what do you want to do? And they said, you know what? We want to strengthen our traditional skills and capacity. We want to be able to do those things that sustained our ancestors for all the years before any of this kind of development came on. So we said, well, what are you talking about? They said, we're talking about trapping, we're talking about hunting, we're talking about traditional processing. And so, you're looking at it and you're thinking, okay, so how do we do that in a meaningful way? And we made that same mistake of thinking that, yeah, we'll figure this out. So we go off. Then we go back to the next conversation, and they tell us, well, we know how to do it. We describe what the ideas we've arrived at, right? Well, we already know how to do it. You just need to help us to do it. So what the company did eventually was bought a large guiding territory and transferred its ownership to the First Nation, who set up this business, who got a number of adjacent Crown leases and expanded their trapping, and eventually not only ran a commercial guide operation, but started a tanning and processing facility, and that kind of thing. So there was nothing to do with our industry, or with that proponent's industry, but it was the solution that worked for them. And that's what I think when I say about being strategic about matching the community's interests with the corporation's objectives. The corporations, we tend to come in with kind of high level and somewhat common objectives, right? I mean, there's always the objective of profit. That's the given, that's in the background, right? Thanks, Bob. And but the real objective they wanted to have some kind of certainty in this relationship that allowed them to go on with conducting their business and carrying it on. And the First Nations objective was completely about cultural survival. So I think you just have to recognize that the dialogue has to get to a very intimate level, and it has to get to a place where it's based on a lot of trust before people are going to actually